Welcome to the adventure of the Sevenoaks Ghost, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, the Sussex Apocrypha, playing in the year 1910. My dear friend Sherlock Holmes kept, during his retirement in Sussex, a private ledger. In it, he coded accounts of cases too strange or sensitive for public consumption, a collection I have come to call the Sussex Apocrypha. These chronicles reveal a more contemplative Holmes, grappling not with London's fog, but with the quiet complexities of a changing world, and the long shadows of his own past. The first of these curious episodes which I have deciphered concerns an old adversary, and a question of impossible justice. I shall therefore begin my account with the adventure of the Sevenoaks Ghost. Chapter 1. The quiet life upon the Sussex Downs, which had so restored my friend's health, had also, I feared, begun to weigh upon his singular spirit. The autumn of 1910 had been placid, the days marked not by the thrill of the chase, but by the drone of Holmes's beloved bees. On this particular evening, a log shifted in the hearth, with a soft hiss, casting dancing shadows across the room. Holmes sat hunched over a chemical apparatus, the very picture of contented retirement, or so it seemed. The piece shattered, not with a crash, but with a sound more mundane yet intrusive. Heavy boots crunching on the gravel path to our cottage. A moment later, a firm, almost desperate knock echoed from the front door. Our housekeeper, Martha Hudson, bustled past the sitting-room entrance, her footsteps quickening with curiosity. "Mr. Holmes, there is a man to see you." "He seems most insistent, sir, and says it is a matter of an old acquaintance," Martha Hudson answered. Holmes straightened up, his brow furrowed with annoyance at the interruption. The man who entered was a study in hardship. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles carved by sea salt and sun, and his frame was stooped, not with deference, but with the permanent ache of age. As he stepped into the light of the fire, I saw a flicker of recognition in Holmes's eyes, a tightening of his thin lips. Indeed. "The years have not been entirely kind, have they, Mr. Crowe?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The name struck me like a physical blow. Jonas Crowe, the notorious seaman safecracker of the 90s, whose uncanny ability to defeat any lock with tools of his own devising had been the talk of Scotland Yard for a year. It was a case that had cemented Holmes's reputation, and I recalled it vividly. "They have not, Mr. Holmes. But prison and hard labour have made me an honest man. A thing which the constabulary refuses to believe." Jonas Crowe replied. His voice was a low rasp, like rope pulled over a barnacled stone. He held his hands out towards the fire, and I saw that his knuckles were swollen and misshapen, the fingers twisted into stiff claws. "And you have come to me to persuade them?" "After I was the chief instrument of your conviction." "A most curious choice," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "You, sir, were the only one who truly understood my methods. You're the only one who might believe another man is using them now." "I'm being framed, Mr. Holmes." "I swear it on my life," said Jonas Crowe. "A theft occurred 3 nights ago at the estate of Lord Ashworth in Sevenoaks. A single gem of immense value. The window was forced with a shipwright's auger, and the safe opened with a miniature block and tackle secured by a marline hitch. Your exact signature, down to the last detail." Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes let the accusation hang in the air. His gaze was not on the man's anxious face, but was fixed with an unnerving intensity upon those gnarled, trembling hands. "Yet, I observe from the pronounced inflammation of your metacarpal joints that you suffer from a severe and chronic form of arthritis. Such fine work! The delicate manipulation of a lock tumbler, the threading of a miniature pulley, would be an agony for you, if not an outright physical impossibility." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A look of profound, desperate relief washed over Crowe's grizzled features. He held up his twisted hands as if they were exhibits for the defense. "It is impossible. That is what I told them. The inspector, Lestrade's boy, he just laughed at me," answered Jonas Crowe. and he would be wrong to do so. A fact is a fact, Sherlock Holmes said. His piercing gaze returned to our visitor, the languor of retirement now entirely vanished. You said another man is using your methods. Implying this is not the first time, Sherlock Holmes said. There was another. A shadow in my old crew, clever with his hands and cleverer with his silence. He learned my ways, every knot and every tool. He informed on me, took the lion's share of our last haul, and vanished like smoke. I always called him the ghost. It seems he has come back to haunt me, Jonas Crowe said. A ghost. The word hung in the quiet air of the cottage, a direct challenge to the rational world my friend inhabited. The old fire I had missed for so long was suddenly rekindled in Holmes's eyes. He rose from his chair, his tall frame suddenly electric with a familiar predatory energy. A physical impossibility which the police ignore. A crime that is a perfect facsimile of a 20-year-old case. And a spectre from the past. Watson, this is no longer a simple matter of a relapsed criminal. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The game, it seems, has found its way to our doorstep. Pack your bag. We leave for Sevenoaks on the morning train, remarked Sherlock Holmes. The journey to Sevenoaks was a contemplative one, at least for me. The steady thrum of the motorcar engine was a modern counterpoint to the ancient rolling hills of Sussex. Holmes beside me was a study in coiled energy, his gaze fixed on the passing countryside, as if he might deduce the culprit from the very hedgerows. I, on the other hand, found my thoughts drifting to Jonas Crowe, a man Holmes had put away, now pleading for his help. As we ascended the drive to Ashworth Manor, a formidable structure of grey stone brooding under a pale sky, a brisk wind whipped around us, carrying the distinct briny scent of the nearby sea. A smell of distance and journeys, I thought, entirely fitting for the day. We were shown into a vast library by a butler of advanced years, whose movements were precise yet betrayed a certain physical fragility. The air within was heavy, with the scent of old leather, beeswax, and a faint, lingering trace of wood smoke from a cold hearth. Lord Ashworth himself rose to greet us, a man of perhaps 50, radiating a brisk modern energy that seemed to clash with the ancient, faded tapestries on his walls. He was a man of the new century, impatient with the shadows of the old. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Reed. Good of you to come, though I dare say it is a fool's errand. Scotland Yard assures me they have the matter well in hand. It is Crowe, of course. The man is a recidivist, you see, a creature of habit. He cannot help but return to his old ways, Lord Ashworth replied. Habit is indeed a powerful force, my lord, yet desperation can be a stronger one. Why would a guilty man, already caught by Scotland Yard, draw the attention of the one man who convicted him before? Remarked Sherlock Holmes. A performance. A final, desperate gambit to muddy the waters. He knows your reputation for the unconventional. He hopes to play on your sympathies, a complete waste of time. Now, if you must, come and see the room, remarked Lord Ashworth. As we prepared to follow, Lord Ashworth turned to his butler, who lingered by the door. Washington, see to it that the windows in the west wing are properly secured tonight. The salt in the sea air plays havoc with the latches, Lord Ashworth replied. At once, my lord. It is a constant battle against the elements here. The sea gives with one hand, and takes with the other, remarked the butler. Fenton's reply was delivered in a low, respectful tone. He bowed slightly before departing, his soft-soled shoes making almost no sound on the polished floor. As a physician, I noted the slight tremor in his hand as he held the door, a subtle sign of the fragility he otherwise concealed so well. I saw Holmes cast a fleeting, thoughtful glance after him, his focus momentarily diverted. We then proceeded up the grand staircase, the ancient wood groaning under our tread, as if complaining of the intrusion. The bedroom was much as the thief had left it. A large sash window stood open, allowing a cold draught to billow the heavy velvet curtains. The chill air carried with it the faint, briny scent of the sea, a constant reminder of the manor's coastal location. Drawers had been pulled from a tall boy, and their contents spilled onto the rug, yet nothing of obvious value seemed to have been taken. Below the window, a sturdy rope of seaman's hemp was still tied to the leg of a heavy writing desk. Holmes ignored the general disarray and went directly to this singular piece of evidence. He knelt, his long, thin fingers tracing the intricate knot with an almost reverent touch. "That knot, Holmes. It is precisely the Marlene hitch you described from the original case files, is it not?" "The very same," said Dr. Alistair Reed. Holmes stood, brushing the dust from his knees. His eyes gleamed with that familiar, intense light of discovery. "It is more than the same, my dear Reed. It is a flawless reproduction. Observe the way the standing part of the rope is seized to its own end, with 7 precise turns. This is no common knot. It is a Marlene hitch, a specific and rather elegant knot, favoured by deep-water sailors for securing heavy cargo against a swell. It was Jonas Crowe's signature, written in hemp, the very detail that, I confess, convicted him in my own mind 20 years ago," replied Sherlock Holmes. "A signature indeed. The man has signed his own confession." "What more proof do you require, Holmes? The case is closed," Lord Ashworth said. Holmes did not look at him, his gaze fixed upon the knot, as if it held a deeper secret. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet and laced with a new thread of doubt. "On the contrary, my lord. The very perfection of it is what gives me pause. It is an echo, too precise, too clear. A forger, when copying a signature, often strives for a perfection the original never possessed. To understand this crime, I fear I must first listen more closely to the echoes of the past," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The Marlene hitch knot, so expertly tied, had cast a long shadow over our investigation. Back in the sitting room of our temporary lodgings, the scent of damp tweed and pipe smoke did little to dispel the gloom that had settled upon us. Holmes, who had been a whirlwind of energy at the crime scene, was now unnervingly still, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. The rhythmic ticking of a mantel clock, loud in the otherwise silent room, seemed to measure out his thoughts. "It is the very signature of the man, Holmes." "What more proof could the police require?" answered Dr. Alistair Reed. "It is precisely because the signature is so perfect that I am troubled." "It is too perfect, Reed," declared Sherlock Holmes. He stood and began to pace, a restless shadow against the firelight, the floorboards creaking softly under his weight. The ticking of the clock seemed to follow his steps. A forger who signs a masterpiece with the artist's name is clever, but one who copies the signature with the exact tremor of the artist's aged hand is a genius of deception. "We are abandoning the field. I must have my records," Sherlock Holmes responded. And so it was that we found ourselves, an hour later, in a small, dusty office at the Sevenoaks Constabulary. A parcel of files, dispatched by wire from his old strongbox in London, lay upon a scarred wooden desk. The air hung heavy, redolent with the musty aroma of stale ink and yellowing paper, a scent that seemed to whisper of long-forgotten secrets, and from the street below came the distant clatter of a horse-drawn cart on the cobblestones. Holmes untied the bundle with a feverish energy, the rustle of the brittle pages the only sound in the room. "Ah, here we are. The original conviction of Jonas Crowe, 1891. My own notes, Reed. Look at them. The ink is faded, but the facts remain," replied Sherlock Holmes. He fell silent, his eyes scanning the pages with an intensity that seemed to draw the very light from the room. A full 10 minutes passed, marked only by the shifting of dust motes in the single beam of light slanting from the high window, the faint scratching of his fingernail against the paper, and the low, discordant tune he began to hum. A sign, I was beginning to learn, that his mind was working at its fiercest pace. Curious. "Exceedingly curious," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "What is it, Holmes?" Dr. Alistair Reed replied. "In my original report I noted the presence of tar flecks upon the windowsill, consistent with a sailor's rope. But I also noted something else, a detail Lestrade dismissed at the time," stated Sherlock Holmes. He paused, tapping a faded line of script with his long, thin finger. There was a distinct lack of chalk dust. The rope used in that first crime had been treated with powdered chalk for a better grip, a common practice for riggers working in wet conditions, Sherlock Holmes noted. He looked up from the page, his grey eyes burning with a renewed fire that I had not seen since we first arrived. Yet no trace of it was found on Crowe's person or in his lodgings. An inconsistency I filed away, but one that now it screams at me, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Before he could elaborate, the office door swung open with a groan of protest, shattering the quiet concentration of the room. A heavy tread on the floorboards announced a visitor. The man who entered was portly and red-faced, with a thick moustache and an air of impatient authority. I recognized him at once. "Holmes, I heard you were meddling down here." Chief Inspector Davies, retired, replied. He paused, letting the gruff accusation hang in the dusty air. The Yard thought this was settled. Crowe did it then, and he's done it now. A simple case of a leopard not changing its spots. Chief Inspector Davies, retired, replied. His voice was a boom that seemed to shake the dust from the shelves, rattling a loose pane in the window frame. It was clear that for Chief Inspector Davies, retired, there were no shades of grey. "My dear Davies, how good of you to offer an opinion unburdened by the facts. I am currently examining the spots themselves, and find their pattern most irregular," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "Irregular? The man tied his sailor's knot. It's his mark. Don't waste our time with your ghostly theories. We need him behind bars." Chief Inspector Davies, retired, replied. Holmes simply ignored him, the man's blustering fading into mere background noise. His gaze turned from the files to fix upon me. A new light had entered his eyes, one I recognized from my own profession: sharp, clinical purpose. The inconsistency in the past had illuminated a new path forward in the present. Dr. Reed, your particular expertise is now of the utmost importance. Davies speaks of the knot, the physical act, replied Sherlock Holmes. He gestured dismissively towards the fuming Chief Inspector, but his eyes never left mine. "I must ask you to set aside your assumptions and provide me with a medical fact." "Would you be so good as to pay a visit to Mr. Jonas Crowe?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. I was puzzled by the sudden shift, but the intensity in Holmes's expression compelled immediate agreement. I nodded. "I wish for you to conduct a thorough examination of his hands, his wrists, his fingers." Sherlock Holmes noted. His voice dropped, becoming quiet and precise, cutting through the lingering tension in the small office like a surgeon's scalpel. "I must know, with absolute medical certainty, if the man who stands before you today possesses the physical capacity to manipulate a rope with the strength and dexterity required to tie that intricate marline hitch," declared Sherlock Holmes. By the following morning, the tension from my conversation with Holmes had given way to a grim, silent purpose. Our hired motor car chugged rhythmically through the damp Sussex lanes, contrasting sharply with my friend's contemplative stillness. Beside me sat the quiet professional, Dr. Alistair Reed, his leather medical bag resting upon his knees. Our destination was the local constabulary, a severe brick building smelling of damp stone and carbolic soap. A weary constable led us down a narrow corridor, our footsteps echoing on the flagstones. He stopped at a heavy, iron-barred door, which opened with a grating squeal of metal, revealing the sparse cell within. Jonas Crowe sat upon a simple cot, a hunched figure silhouetted against the light from a single high window. He looked up as we entered, his face a mask of tired resignation. He was gaunter and more fragile than I had imagined from the old case files. "Mr. Crowe, this is my colleague, Dr. Reed. He is here to conduct a brief examination, with your consent," stated Sherlock Holmes. "What does my consent matter in this place?" Jonas Crowe replied. His voice was a low rasp, thick with a lifetime of salt air and, I suspected, a deep-seated bitterness. He held out his hands, palms up, in a gesture of utter surrender. "Examine away, Doctor. You'll find nothing but old bones and regret," responded Jonas Crowe. Dr. Reed stepped forward and gently took Crowe's hands. I could see them clearly. The knuckles were swollen, the fingers twisted into claw-like shapes. As Reed carefully manipulated each joint, Crowe flinched, hissing a sharp breath through his teeth, but he made no other sound. The ossification is quite advanced. "A chronic and severe case of rheumatoid arthritis," Dr. Alistair Reed said. He spoke with the detached authority of a man certain of his facts. Holmes, who had been observing with an unnerving intensity, finally spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet cell. "The knot. Doctor. The key piece of evidence is a complex mariner's hitch, tied with considerable speed and dexterity." "Could these hands accomplish such a task?" stated Sherlock Holmes. A profound silence filled the small space, broken only by the faint dripping of water somewhere down the corridor. Dr. Reed released Crowe's hands, and looked directly at my friend. "Absolutely not. Mr. Crowe lacks the finger suppleness and grip strength needed for such precise manipulation. He hasn't had that ability for at least a decade. In my professional opinion, it's a physical impossibility." Dr. Alistair Reed replied. Holmes did not reply. He stared at the prisoner's gnarled hands, and I saw not a triumphant detective, but a scientist confronting a fact that had shattered his theory. The heavy cell door clanged shut behind us, its echo following us down the corridor to a small, dusty office where we could speak freely. "A physical impossibility," observed Sherlock Holmes. He murmured the words, his back to us as he stared out the grimy window. His lethargy was gone, replaced by the familiar, coiled energy I knew so well. "Watson, we have been chasing an echo. The entire case presented to us by Scotland Yard is a fiction, a carefully constructed narrative," explained Sherlock Holmes. "Then Crowe is innocent," responded Dr. John Watson, "of this crime, unequivocally. Dr. Reed's diagnosis is our cornerstone. The knot was not mere evidence. It was a signature, deliberately forged to condemn a man who could not possibly have written it. We are not hunting a common thief who has relapsed into his old ways," stated Sherlock Holmes. He turned, his eyes shining with a fierce light, and began to pace. The floorboards creaked under the sharp rhythmic tread of his shoes, a sound that matched the sudden racing tempo of his mind. "We are hunting an artist of deception, a man who knows Crowe's history intimately, yet operates with a cruel and modern cunning. The ghost Crowe spoke of is real, Watson, and far more substantial than we imagined. Our investigation must begin anew," replied Sherlock Holmes. His mind was already leaping ahead, mapping the new territory before us. The puzzle was now infinitely more complex, and therefore infinitely more interesting to him. We must understand the world Crowe now inhabits, the village, the local gossip, his every acquaintance. It is there we shall find the man who hides behind an old sailor's reputation. Come, Watson. Our true work has only just begun," Sherlock Holmes responded. Dr. Reed's diagnosis had entirely upended the case. Jonas Crowe's arthritic hands were cleared by medical science. With that, the foundation of Scotland Yard's certainty crumbled to dust. We were left with a ghost, a mimic who possessed Crowe's singular skill without his physical presence. The following morning found us taking the air in Sevenoaks. The crisp autumn breeze did little to clear the muddle from my own mind, while the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer was the only forceful sound in the tranquil village. A village, Watson, is an organism. Its arteries are not the roads but the channels of gossip, and its heart is the local purveyor of news. Before we confront the science of this crime, let us first consult its sociology. Sherlock Holmes responded. His gaze fell upon a small but bustling haberdashery. We soon found ourselves within, the little bell above the door announcing our arrival with a cheerful jingle. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Martha Hudson, a woman whose sharp, bird-like eyes missed nothing. Her voice, when she spoke, was as crisp and dry as starched linen. "Mr. Holmes." "Celebrities. Here. Ha! Now, Jonas Crowe. There's a sorry tale. Hermit he is. Buys thread, bit of bacon, then shuffles off quick as you please. Saw him once, trying to pick up a coin he'd dropped. Lord, what a sight! Hands all gnarled like old tree roots. Took him a full minute, it did." "Never seen anything sadder in my life," answered Martha Hudson. "Good heavens, Holmes, that's exactly what Dr. Reed described. The poor fellow couldn't tie his own bootlaces, let alone a complex marline hitch," commented Dr. John Watson. Her words confirmed our suspicions. We left the haberdashery and proceeded to the scene of the crime itself. Lord Ashworth's mansion was a monument to new money, its clean stone facade jarring against the ancient oaks that gave the region its name. We were met by his head of security, a stout man named Finch, whose pride in his work was evident in his booming voice and ramrod posture. "Lord Ashworth spared no expense, Mr. Holmes. This is the latest Marconi bell system. Absolutely foolproof," remarked Mr. Finch. "Foolproof is a challenge, not a guarantee. You may dispense with the tour of the premises, Mr. Finch. Show me the brain of your operation." "The alarm system," replied Sherlock Holmes. Finch led us past the violated safe, and into a small, sterile room humming with a low electric thrum. He gestured to a polished oak panel, from which snaked a Medusa's head of brass-tipped wires and rubber conduits, a formidable display of modern technology. "Good heavens, it looks like a telephone exchange. I wouldn't know where to begin," responded Dr. John Watson. "Precisely, Doctor. Only myself and the engineers from the manufacturer have the full schematics. It's tied to every door and window." "An open circuit sounds a bell loud enough to wake the dead in Maidstone," responded Mr. Finch. "And yet, this system was not broken, was it? The wires were not severed, nor the bell mechanism smashed. It was simply quieted." Sherlock Holmes responded. "Well, you see, the thief, he bypassed the main circuit. From outside, mind you. Used the external junction box. It's not simple work, sir. Takes a real knowledge of electrical engineering, that does," answered Mr. Finch. "And who, besides yourself and the installers, would possess such knowledge?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "No one. The plans are kept under lock and key in his lordship's study. The installation team, they were reputable men from London. I checked their credentials myself," responded Mr. Finch. Finch's confidence had vanished, replaced by a professional's bewildered respect for the intruder's skill. As we departed, the crunch of our boots on the gravel drive seemed to mark the rhythm of Holmes's deductions. He was silent for several hundred yards before he finally stopped. "Therein lies the paradox, Watson, and the key. The knot belongs to the 19th century. A relic of maritime craft. But the method of entry belongs entirely to the 20th. Sherlock Holmes responded. "A cracksman's signature and an electrical engineer's technique. They seem utterly contradictory," responded Dr. John Watson. "Precisely. To bypass that system requires a modern mind, one familiar with volts and amperes. Our phantom is a man of two ages. He possesses the cunning of the old world and the knowledge of the new. This is not a common thief. This is an artist of a new and terrible school, and he has used Crowe's history as his canvas," replied Sherlock Holmes. As he spoke, a new sound intruded upon the country quiet, the sputtering roar of a motor-car engine. It approached at a speed that was frankly dangerous for these narrow lanes. The vehicle, A black Wolseley skidded to a halt just ahead of us. From it emerged the unmistakable figure of Inspector Lestrade Jr., his face set with a grim and misguided purpose. "It seems, Watson, that officialdom has arrived to claim its pound of flesh. We must act quickly, lest an innocent man be caged by the ghosts of the past and the impatience of the present," stated Sherlock Holmes. The clatter of our hansome's wheels on the cobblestones gave way to a sudden quiet as we drew up before the constabulary, a squat brick building that seemed to frown upon the pleasant village square. Within, the air was thick with the scent of wet wool and ink, and the insistent, staccato clicking of a telegraph key from a back room provided a nervous rhythm to the proceedings. Chief Inspector Davies stood near a scarred wooden desk, his chest puffed with the self-importance of a man who believes his work is all but done. He slapped a folded warrant against his palm with a sharp crack. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, and Dr. Reed, you are just in time to witness the proper conclusion to this affair. I am preparing to have Jonas Crowe taken into custody," remarked Chief Inspector Davies. He gestured to a constable who stood ready by the door, his boots creaking slightly on the worn floorboards. Dr. Reed shifted uncomfortably, but it was Holmes who stepped forward, his quiet energy drawing every eye in the room. "An arrest would be premature, Inspector. In fact, it would be a grave error," explained Sherlock Holmes. Davies's face hardened. A low murmur went through the other officers present, a rustle of uniforms and shuffling feet. The telegraph in the next room fell silent, as if the operator himself was straining to listen. "Premature. The man is a known thief. The method is his signature." "The evidence is overwhelming. What more is there to consider?" answered Chief Inspector Davies. "Only the evidence itself." "You have been so impressed by the ghost you have failed to properly examine the spectre's handiwork," observed Sherlock Holmes. With a flourish, Holmes withdrew the coarse rope from his coat pocket. The gaslight glinted off the intricate knot as he laid it on the inspector's desk, his manner not triumphant, but coolly professorial. "You see Crowe's famous mariner's hitch, do you not, Inspector? It is, I suspect, all you have seen. A man tying a knot he has fashioned 1,000 times does so with fluid, unconscious skill. There is a rhythm to it, an economy of motion," replied Sherlock Holmes. He produced a pencil from his waistcoat, tapping a specific twist in the fibre. The soft tap of graphite on hemp was the only sound in the suddenly tense room. "That rhythm is absent here. Observe this loop. It is too perfect. The tension is minutely uneven, as if the creator paused to consult a diagram or a memory," observed Sherlock Holmes. "Paused? What nonsense is this, Holmes?" "It's a knot," replied Chief Inspector Davies. "Precisely. It is a knot tied with hesitation, not habit. It is not the work of a master, but of a diligent student." "A forgery, Inspector, in hemp," explained Sherlock Holmes. "And with Crowe's advanced arthritis, his hands would tremble. They would produce a sloppy, fumbled knot, perhaps," replied Dr. Alistair Reed. Reed's calm, professional tone lent medical authority to Holmes's forensic observation. He met the inspector's gaze without flinching. "But they could not produce this. This is the work of a steady, careful hand, one not afflicted by the tremors I observed. It is a medical impossibility," Dr. Alistair Reed said. Davies stared at the rope, his certainty visibly eroding. He picked it up, the coarse fibres whispering against his fingers as he turned it over, and let out a frustrated sigh that seemed to stir the dusty air. "This is mere conjecture, Holmes. Your theories cannot outweigh the solid facts before us," remarked Chief Inspector Davies. "Is it? Or is it observation versus assumption? To arrest Crowe now is to apprehend the shadow, and let the man who casts it slip away. Give me 24 hours? Allow me to prove my theory is more substantial than your fact," declared Sherlock Holmes. For a long moment, the only sound was the scrape of the inspector's boot on the floorboards. He looked from Holmes's intense, focused gaze to the impassive face of Dr. Reed, and finally back to the knot in his hand. He threw it down on the desk with a clatter. "Very well. 24 hours. But if you find nothing, Holmes, the warrant will be served. Do not mistake my patience for weakness," Chief Inspector Davies replied. The heavy oak door of the constabulary closed behind us with a definitive thud, its echo swallowed by the quiet of the village square. In the chill evening air, the distant chime of a church clock striking the hour was a welcome relief from the stuffy station. A familiar glint of intellectual fire in Holmes's eyes told me the hunt had truly begun. "A forgery, gentlemen," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused under a gas lamp, its gentle hiss a counterpoint to the silence. The light cast his sharp features in stark relief as he looked from me to Dr. Reed. "And like any forgery, it will not withstand the scrutiny of true science. The naked eye can only take us so far," observed Sherlock Holmes. He began walking again, his pace quickening with purpose. "Now we must turn to the microscope. The truth of this affair is not in the knot, but in the very fibres from which it is tied. I have often observed that the moments preceding one of Holmes's great revelations are marked by a peculiar form of chaos. The Sevenoaks lodgings were no exception, the air thick with the acrid tang of chemicals and the familiar, potent scent of his strongest tobacco. Chief Inspector Davies had departed, leaving a silence charged with my friend's singular intellectual fervour. Holmes, having secured a temporary reprieve for Jonas Crowe, was now a man possessed. He had commandeered our sitting-room table, transforming it into a makeshift laboratory littered with glass slides, pipettes, and the two crucial lengths of rope, one from the dusty archives of Crowe's original case, the other, the damning evidence from Lord Ashworth's safe. Dr. Reed, our steadfast new acquaintance, sat observing by the fire. The only sounds were the gentle hiss of the gas lamp, and the occasional, minute scrape of metal, as Holmes adjusted his powerful brass microscope. For the better part of an hour, he had uttered not a single word, his entire being seemingly concentrated into the task before him. It was a display of focus I had witnessed 100 times, yet it never failed to impress me. At last he straightened up, a thin, triumphant smile playing upon his lips. I recognized the look in his eye, the unmistakable gleam of the hunter who has finally sighted his quarry. His voice, though quiet, cut through the room with an electric intensity. "Gentlemen, our ghost is beginning to materialize. Dr. Reed, your medical eye is needed at the microscope," replied Sherlock Holmes. The doctor rose and joined us at the table. Holmes, with a dramatic flourish entirely his own, indicated the eyepiece of his powerful brass microscope. "This first slide contains fibres from the original knot, tied by Crowe in his prime. Observe the brutal efficiency. The strands are crushed, deeply bruised by the sheer force of a sailor's hands," stated Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Reed peered into the microscope, his expression one of deep concentration. After a long moment, he looked up. "Indeed. The cellular structure is severely damaged, consistent with immense, sustained pressure." "And the second sample?" replied Dr. Alistair Reed. With the deftness of a surgeon, Holmes swapped the slides. A new section of rope, the one from the recent Ashworth theft, now lay under the lens. I watched Dr. Reed as he bent to the eyepiece once more. After a moment of silent examination, he drew back, a sharp intake of breath betraying his sudden understanding. "Your diagnosis, doctor," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "It is entirely different. Superficially the same knot, but the pressure points are more precise, less forceful. The fibres are not so much crushed as they are persuaded. It is the work of dexterity, not brute strength. Holmes, it is entirely inconsistent with the advanced arthritis I diagnosed in Mr. Crowe. His hands could no more tie this knot than they could carve the Lord's Prayer on the head of a pin," replied Dr. Alistair Reed. A soft, dry rustling broke the silence as Holmes clapped his hands together, his posture radiating triumph. "Precisely, Watson. The first knot bears the mark of a craftsman, The second, the careful imitation of a student. "This is no relapse, but a clever forgery," replied Sherlock Holmes. He began to pace before the hearth, his lean frame casting a long, dancing shadow against the wall. The quiet room now seemed to crackle with his renewed energy. The game, as he would say, was afoot once more. The question is no longer if Crowe is innocent, but who would possess such intimate knowledge of his original crime? Who benefits from his re-imprisonment? The police files are one source, but this facsimile is too perfect, too personal, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He stopped his pacing as abruptly as he had begun, his grey eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the darkened window panes. I could see the complex machinery of his mind working behind them, forging a new line of inquiry in the crucible of his intellect. "We have been examining the evidence of the crime. Now we must examine the architecture of the frame itself. Tomorrow, Watson, our investigation turns from the stolen jewels to the household of the man who reported the theft. We must examine the staff of Lord Ashworth himself." Sherlock Holmes responded. The morning was crisp as our carriage wheels crunched upon the gravel of Lord Ashworth's drive. The great house stood impassive, its windows like vacant eyes. Dr. Reed shared my foreboding. But Holmes was transformed. The languor of Baker Street had vanished, replaced by the keen energy of a hunter who has scented his quarry. "Remember, gentlemen, we are not here to interrogate, but to observe. A lie is a difficult thing to maintain, and its threads will invariably snag on the truth if we but provide enough hooks," Sherlock Holmes noted. The heavy oak door swung open before we could reach for the bell pull, revealing a tall, severe-looking man in butler's livery. He was ramrod straight, with a face so devoid of expression it might have been carved from pale wood. A grandfather clock in the hall behind him measured out the seconds with a heavy, sonorous tick. "Mr. Holmes, I presume. Lord Ashworth is not at home, but he instructed me to offer you every assistance." "I am Jennings, the butler," answered Jennings. "Excellent, Jennings. We wish to have a brief word with the staff who were on duty the night of the theft." "The housemaid who attended her ladyship's chambers, perhaps?" stated Sherlock Holmes. "I am afraid that will be impossible. Young Mary is indisposed." "A sudden fever," Jennings replied. Jennings' reply was seamless, yet Holmes's eyes narrowed for the briefest of moments. It was a subtle obstruction, delivered with utmost politeness. "Beside me." Dr. Reed cleared his throat. "A fever, you say? Perhaps I might be of some assistance to the poor girl." "I am a medical man, after all," said Dr. Alistair Reed. "That is most kind, sir, but a physician has already been summoned from the village. She is to have complete rest. The footman as well is away on an urgent errand for his lordship," Jennings said. His voice was a wall of courteous finality. We were being expertly managed. Holmes took a slow turn about the grand hall, his gaze sweeping over portraits and furniture as the clock ticked solemnly. He stopped before the butler. "You run a tight ship, Jennings. One might almost say a disciplined one. Tell me, this particular locking mechanism on the inner vestibule door, it is a rather antiquated design, is it not?" "A Chubb lock, but of a model I have seen more commonly in institutional settings than private residences," declared Sherlock Holmes. The butler's composure flickered. It was no more than a slight tightening of the jaw, a brief dart of the eyes, but to Holmes it was a confession. Jennings recovered himself almost instantly. "I would not know, sir. I am merely a butler." Jennings replied. "Are you? Your posture, man, is not that of domestic service. It is the rigid stance of one who has stood guard for years. The way you hold your hands at rest, thumbs locked, is a habit drilled into the men of the prison service." "I have seen it 100 times," Sherlock Holmes said. A stunned silence fell over the hall, broken only by the clock's relentless ticking. Dr. Reed and I stared, first at Holmes, then at the butler, whose face had become a mask of grey fury. "You were a warder, were you not? And not just at any prison. Dr. Reed, what was the name of the penitentiary to which Jonas Crowe was committed all those years ago? The one just outside Maidstone. Why, that would be HMP Stonegate. It was closed down a decade ago, Dr. Alistair Reed replied. Precisely. Where a certain Mr. Jennings served with distinction for 15 years. The very man who would have had daily opportunity to study Crowe's habits, his knots, his very soul, declared Sherlock Holmes. He then turned to me, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. The ghost, Watson, has a name. Jennings stood frozen, the colour drained from his face. His breath came in ragged gasps as Holmes took a single step forward, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. I think, Jennings, that you and I shall have a conversation. Now, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. We were assembled in Lord Ashworth's study, a room so steeped in silence that the tick of the mantel clock sounded like a blacksmith's hammer. The air was heavy, charged with unspoken accusations. Lord Ashworth paced before the hearth, his agitation a stark contrast to the rigid stillness of Jonas Crowe, who sat hunched in a chair, his gaze fixed upon the worn floorboards. Between them stood the butler, a man named Finch, his posture a perfect model of civility that seemed, at this moment, a grotesque mockery. Holmes stood by the window, his back to us all, a tall, gaunt silhouette against the fading afternoon light. When he finally turned, his eyes bypassed Lord Ashworth entirely and settled upon the butler with a piercing intensity. Finch. You were a guard at Dartmoor Prison for 15 years, were you not? Explained Sherlock Holmes. I saw the butler's composure fracture for a mere instant. A slight twitch of the jaw was his only betrayal before he answered in a tone of practised deference. I was, sir. An honest living, replied the butler. An honest living, spent observing the dishonest. You were on duty in the wing where Mr. Crowe was incarcerated, Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Finch's knuckles were white, where he gripped the back of a chair. You saw his methods discussed, dissected by wardens and police. You learned his signature, not as a practitioner, but as a student, an envious student, observed Sherlock Holmes. Lord Ashworth stopped his pacing, his mouth agape. Crowe looked up, a flicker of disbelief in his tired eyes. What is the meaning of this, Holmes? Finch? But he's a mere servant, Lord Ashworth answered. He is the ghost, my lord. The ghost who framed Mr. Crowe not once, but twice. The original theft, for which Mr. Crowe was convicted, bore the marks of a professional. But I see now that it also bore the marks of an impersonation, replied Sherlock Holmes. His gaze drifted towards Crowe, a silent apology already forming in his expression. It was a subtle clumsiness I attributed to haste, but was in fact a lack of genuine mastery, a flaw I failed to recognize. Holmes's voice was devoid of its usual triumphant ring. Instead, it carried a sombre, reflective quality I had seldom heard. He took a step towards Jonas Crowe. The recent theft of the Ashworth sapphire was a repetition. The thief navigated this house with an intimacy no outsider could possess. But more importantly, the knots used to disable the alarm bell wire were not the deft work of a former sailor like Mr. Crowe. They were the precise, regulation hitches taught to prison guards for securing gates and equipment. The work of a man like you, Finch. The butler's face, once a placid mask, was now a ruin of sweat and pallor. His breath came in ragged little gasps. It's a lie! He put you up to this, the butler answered. His voice, no longer smooth, was a high, desperate whine. But Holmes was implacable. Was it a lie when you acquired the position here, knowing Lord Ashworth was a collector, waiting for the day Mr. Crowe was paroled, so that the perfect scapegoat would be available? You planted the ghost story yourself, a whisper here and there, to prepare the ground. It was you all along, declared Sherlock Holmes. A great, shuddering sob escaped the butler. He collapsed into a nearby chair, his carefully constructed world demolished. He had the notoriety. Even in prison, the wardens spoke of his nerve. I was invisible. I just wanted what he had. The thrill, the reward. I deserved it more than he did, remarked the butler. His words trailed off into a pathetic whimper, a torrent of resentment and greed now spent. It was into this silence that a sharp rap fell upon the study door. At a nod from Holmes, I opened it to admit 2 constables, their presence solid and final. The arrest was a quiet, ignominious affair. Finch offered no resistance, his servile posture now one of utter defeat. As the door closed behind them, a profound quiet, heavier than before, fell upon the room. Holmes turned away from the stunned Lord Ashworth and faced the old convict. He stood before him, and for the first time, I saw not the master detective, but a man confronting a grave error. His voice, when he spoke, was low and clear, intended for Crowe alone. "Mr. Crowe, I ask your forgiveness. A mistake in my profession is not a simple error. It is a life. And I was profoundly mistaken in yours," stated Sherlock Holmes. Jonas Crowe stared at my friend, his weathered face a canvas of disbelief, then of dawning comprehension. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, the first true gesture of a free man I had seen him make. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion.